Right, so we're going to go over Meiosis Lesson 1 notes. Please have your Meiosis Lesson 1 notes packet out so you can be looking at those notes while we go over this. And remember, if you need to rewatch this video, it is uploaded to Canvas. So let's go ahead and get started with Lesson 1. The first thing we need to know is that our bodies have DNA. By this point, we should know that. DNA stands for deoxyribose nucleic acid, so it's a macromolecule nucleic acid, and deoxyribose indicates it has like a 2-sugar base, but we'll get more into that in our next unit. So you can see we have this double helix shape, and this has all the information for both building and running our bodies. So do you have a hitchhiker's thumb or not? That's in your DNA. Do you digest milk by producing the lac enzyme? That's in your DNA. If you need to grow taller because you have a growth spurt, that information is in your DNA. So it basically runs our entire bodies. Humans have 46 chromosomes. So all of that DNA, that spirally DNA that we saw on the last slide, is condensed into a chromosome. So a chromosome is just one individual, and we have 46 of them. These 46 are sorted into 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. Homologous, homo means same, logos means location. So for these homologous chromosomes, they would have basically the same genes, the same length, the same shape, but the traits that are in either gene might be different. So for instance, this location might say you're having a hitchhiker's thumb, and this says that you have a straight thumb. They're at the same place. It's coding for the same thing. It's both your thumb. It's just a matter of the variation of that trait. So these are going to be homologous chromosomes. Moving on. Our chromosomes, like I said, are sorted into 23 pairs. Kind of like if you had 23 pairs of shoes, in reality, you have 46 shoes, and they're sorted into matching pairs. So what happens in a karyotype is this is basically just a picture of your genes. So you can pay a lot of money and send it off, and they will send your DNA away, and they will send you back a picture of your genes that you can hang on your wall. If you want to spend your money that way, go for it, but teach their own. But anyway, this is called a karyotype. We use these in science, in biology, to look at an individual's genes. Now, if you look at this, you can see that each gene here is about the same length. They also have genes in approximately the same locations. However, those traits might be different. So for instance, if we look right here, those two traits look like they're the same because they're both the white next to the black, but these genes look a little different. You see the different pattern there. So each set is a homologous chromosome. Now notice these chromosomes are not shaped like X's, right? Because these are not duplicated chromosomes. These are still singles. So these cells are not going through mitosis or meiosis because our chromosomes are going to duplicate in that sense, which again, we'll talk about later. So you have 23 pairs here, which I'm putting our little chromosomes in little boxes, kind of like keeping your shoes in boxes. Now notice 1 through 22 are numbered, but your last pair over here are lettered, and these are going to be your sex chromosomes. Go over here. So you can see chromosomes 1 through 22, circle those, are going to be your autosomes. Your autosomes are chromosomes that everybody have. 1 is the longest, 22 is the shortest, and these make up most of our genetic structure. In addition, we also have 2 sex chromosomes. So this is going to be X and Y in males and X and X in females. So you can see here that this karyotype belongs to a male because they have a Y chromosome. Also notice the X chromosome is much longer than the Y chromosome. It's because it contains more genetic information. Now, there's 2 types of cells in the body. The first type of cell we have are body cells. These contain pairs, right? So just like our karyotype there, they contain 2 copies of chromosome 1, 2 copies of chromosome 2. This is some type of organism with only 2 chromosomes. So it contains 2 copies of each one. And these are going to be non-reproductive cells. These are anything that is like a hair cell, a nerve cell, a white blood cell, red blood cell, like anything we talked about in mitosis, that's going to be these body cells. There are only 2 types of sex cells or gametes, and these are going to be sperm and egg. And you can see that they only have 1 copy of chromosome 1 and 1 copy of chromosome 2 in each one. And this is because when these combine during fertilization, now you would have 2 copies of chromosome 2 and 2 copies of chromosome 1. So they have to double their chromosome number. So in males, there's going to be sperm. In females, they're going to be eggs. So body cells. Let's go over our vocabulary here. Body cells, these are also called somatic cells or diploid cells. Diploid, diploid, or tomato, tomato. They're called diploid. Remember, di means 2. Because they contain both of copies of the pair of homologous chromosomes. So it's like having all of your shoes. Now, remember, homologous are not exact. They're just very similar. So they have the same traits, just different variations of those traits. It might be the same variation of both traits, but you know, it's like a coin flip, and we'll go over that more next week. The diploid cells, or body cells, are considered 2n, which basically just means n being the total number of pairs. We times that by 2 to get the homologous number, which is 46. So that's more important when you're taking an actual genetics class than to know right now. But you do need to know that body cells, somatic cells, diploid cells, for all of these, we're referring to the cells that everybody has. Male or female, doesn't matter. Anything that is in your body. So this is most of your cells. Meanwhile, germ cells or sex cells, so these can also be called sex cells here, can also be called gametes, can also be called haploid cells. The male germ cell is a Y, female germ cell is an X, although male germ cells can have an X chromosome, but we'll talk about that later. These are considered haploid cells because they contain only 1. So I think haploid half, so it contains half of the body cells. It contains only 1 of the pair of homologous chromosomes. So this would be like if somebody went in your closet and only took 1 of each shoe. And so now you only have half your shoes. You still have 23, but you don't have pairs anymore, which is a horrible prank to pull on somebody. Now, gametes are the actual sperm cells and egg cells. And gametes are considered haploid, considered N there, so we get 23 if we're going into the math behind this. So, in your notes here, you have a sentence you need to fill in the blanks. So, sexual reproduction involves the fusion of 2 gametes of different individuals, resulting in offspring that are a combination of both parents. The joining of the gametes is called fertilization. And when fertilization occurs, the nuclei of the egg and the sperm fuse, and they form an embryo. Right? So make sure you have these circled words filled into those blanks. So meiosis, right? It's very similar to mitosis, except it's not. So the process follows the same thing, interphase, and then you have the PMAT, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, except there's a variation in the PMAT side. The interphase is the same. But during mitosis, which is what we went over last quarter, and cytokinesis, which we also went over, both the nucleus and the cytoplasm divide, resulting in daughter cells that are genetically identical to the parent cells. So remember, this happens in all of our body cells for growth and repair. So in humans, this is going to be growth and repair. Now, meanwhile, meiosis or meiosis, it can be called either one. I like saying meiosis because it reminds me that it makes me who I am. But this is the division and the formation of germ cells or sex cells. So during meiosis, the resulting cells only have half the DNA. Here, in mitosis, they had exactly the same DNA. But after meiosis, they only have half the DNA that was in the original cell. It is very unfortunate that these 2 words sound so similar, but just remember to look at the beginning. If it says MIT, we're talking about exact copies. MEI, meaning making the germ cells. So, to review chromosomes before we get into the process of meiosis. Homologous chromosomes, remember that's what our karyotype had, that picture of all your chromosomes. They have the same length, appearance, and copies of genes, but the actual alleles or variation of those genes may differ. So those would be like your homologous chromosomes. We're going to draw one here and one here. So they are similar. So I'll actually fill this one in orange and fill this one in red because orange and red are similar, but they're not identical. However, a chromatid here is 1/2 of a duplicated chromosome, meaning the duplicated chromosome is when we have a second copy of this one and a second copy of this one. So now we have X's. And these can also be called sister chromatids. So we have sister chromatids of homologous chromosomes. And we'll go over this vocabulary more. We'll practice this vocabulary. And there is an Amoeba Sisters video that will be uploaded to Canvas as well that breaks this down a little bit more. So homologous chromosomes divide during meiosis 1. Sister chromatids divide during meiosis 2. So we're going to go over this whole process now. So we have meiosis 1, meiosis 2, like I just said. So first we have interphase, then we have PMAT 1, and then we have PMAT 2. And the prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, the same basic things are happening. So to review mitosis here, so to review the PMAT, during prophase, the chromosomes condense inside the nucleus. During metaphase, those chromosomes line up to divide. During anaphase, the chromosomes start to split off to the two sides. And then during telophase, 2 new nuclei are then formed, each with the individual chromosomes. All right? So that is our PMAT here. And actually, those should only have one of each chromosome. My bad. So, like that. So we started out with 2 duplicated chromosomes and we got 1 of each. Remember, this is mitosis. This is not what we're going over now. I just wanted to review what happened. So they line up in the middle, they go to the sides, and then we have telophase there. Moving on, now we're going to go over meiosis. So this is what we actually want to go over. So you can see prophase, we have 4 chromosomes. So this is a homologous pair, and those are homologous pairs. Which is kind of hard to see, but we know that because of the different lengths here. So those 2 are long and those 2 are short. So you can see during metaphase 1, the homologous chromosomes line up next to each other, right? So the tall ones lined it up next to each other and the short ones. We're going to call this one 1 and this one 2. Now you can see instead of the X pulling apart this way, the whole chromosome gets pulled over to each side, so the whole duplicated chromosome. So you actually have like a double little line there. So it's getting pulled over to either side during anaphase 1. So now at telophase 1, you have duplicated chromosomes. So you have chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 1, and chromosome 2. And now each cell has 1 chromosome 1, 1 chromosome 2, 1 chromosome 1, and 1 chromosome 2. So we only have half the DNA, but we have 2 copies of half that DNA. So for instance, if you got this trait here, you don't have enough DNA to run a body, but you have 2 copies of the same DNA. It's like me taking a worksheet, only taking 1 page of the notes, but then making a bunch of copies of it, right? So it's not going to do you very good to get the whole assignment, but you have 2 of page 1 instead of having page 1 and page 2. If you're confused on this, again, there is another Amoeba Sisters video, and drawing it out helps a lot with this as well. So you can be drawing this out in your notes as we go through. Now this, remember at the end here, so if I go back here, oh, it won't let me go back. Okay, so in the last one, you remember we ended with the 2 cells at the end of telophase 1. So now in prophase 2, so we go into mitosis or meiosis 2 now, we have those 2 daughter cells. they're going to go through the same process, right? So we end up with 4 cells instead of 2. But this time, it's kind of the same as mitosis, where the chromosomes line up along the center. So we have 1 and 2. Then the sister chromatids, so these are almost identical copies, they divide during anaphase 2. So now during telophase, you have 1 and 2, 1 and 2, and 2 and 1 and 2. So now we end up with 4 daughter cells, right, total, and each of them have half the original information of the original cell, right? So each one of these would turn into a sperm. And then eggs are a little bit different, but so each one of these would turn into a cell. Now, if it was an egg cell, only one of them would become an egg. And this is because the egg has all the cytoplasm. So out of the 4, you would have 2, 3, and then you'd have one big one with the nucleus, right? And this one would become the egg. For the sperm, you have 4 little sperm because all the sperm do is provide DNA. So this sperm and this egg would combine. The cytoplasm out here, all the organelles, the mitochondria, if it's a plant chloroplast, all of that, they come from the mom. They come from the egg cell. The DNA, though, comes from the sperm as well. And this is called gametogenesis, right? So the formation or the start of gametes. Okay, so this is going to be on your quiz today. If you are watching this video for the first time. You can see here we're going to compare mitosis to meiosis. In mitosis, we only have 2 cells that are formed, whereas in meiosis, we have 4 cells. That's because the process happens twice. The final cells here are diploid or diploid in mitosis, meaning they have 2 copies of each chromosome, whereas over here in the haploid cells for meiosis, each cell only has 1 copy. The final cells are genetically identical for mitosis, right? This is why if a skin cell produces a new skin cell, it's still just a skin cell, and it's identical to the original one. Whereas during meiosis, we produce unique cells. So each new daughter cell has different DNA or a different combination of the original parent's DNA. And we're going to have an activity or lab on this that we'll do next week. This is only evolved, mitosis is only involved in asexual reproduction. So bacteria, single-celled organisms that are making exact copies. If there's sexual reproduction, we have meiosis, because this is what's making our sperm and egg. So that's the process of meiosis. Right. Genetic variation is differences in the physical trait of an individual that belongs from the group to which it belongs, excuse me. So if we look around the room, we're all part of the same population. We're all humans. And we all have certain traits, like thumbs, right? We have thumbs. But those thumbs can have different traits. Maybe your fingernails grow really slowly, or maybe you have a hitchhiker's thumb, right? We all have ears. Maybe your earlobes are attached. Maybe they're free, right? So this is genetic variation. Meiosis and sexual reproduction, it increases this genetic variation, which we know actually increases the survivability of a species. More genetic variation that a species have, the better off they are at surviving. So for instance, cheetahs have very, very little genetic variation. And this is because they almost went extinct at one point. So if there was another major collapse of society or of ecology in some way, cheetahs would go extinct pretty quick. Whereas humans, we have a lot of genetic variation. We all have a lot of different genes. So we have a tendency to survive a little bit better. And we'll get more into that when we talk about evolution. Right. Now notice how in metaphase and anaphase 1, the homologous chromosomes lined up, right? So the pairs are right next to each other. This means that whatever chromosome you get from chromosome 1 and whatever chromosome you get for number 2, they don't depend on each other. And what this means in the real world is just because you have attached earlobes, right? So let's say this is earlobes. Just because you have attached earlobes does not mean you also have a hitchhiker's thumb. Those 2 traits sort independently. So each of your traits sort by themselves. This is why you might have your mom's eyes, but your dad's nose, because those two traits do not depend on each other. So what we're saying here, the information on one chromosome does not affect the information on another chromosome, right? Each chromosome is sorted independently. All right, one of the last things I want to go over here is that you noticed in the previous slides they were blue and pink, and then they kind of switched little tails here. This is called crossing over. So during metaphase 1, when the homologous chromosomes, remember these two are homologous chromosomes line up, their DNA actually crosses over and exchanges some information. This makes genetic variation increase even further, right? So we even get more genetic variation because this entire chromosome came from mom, except this little bit came from dad, and you end up getting that chromosome. So this is something that we more recently discovered, and this is why chromosomes, you can even have more genetic variation. So part of one little chromatid breaks off and adds to another, and this is called crossing over. Last thing, fertilization. So two gametes of different types, so a sperm and an egg, they fuse, they produce a zygote, and now this has the full set of DNA. Because this had 1/2 the DNA, this had 1/2 the DNA, they come together to have all the DNA. So the DNA come from each parent. The resulting individual will have a unique set of genes. And because of independent assortment and crossing over, each new embryo will have increased the genetic variation within that population. So the more babies that are born, the more genetic variation occurs. This is especially true when people of different populations from around the world are interbreeding. So 50 to 60 years ago, the probability that you'd marry somebody from your hometown was about 90%. Nowadays, it's not the same. People are marrying other people or having babies with other people from all over the world. So we don't tend to have, marry our neighbor anymore. And so this is increasing genetic variation at a very rapid rate in modern day humans. So that's the lesson. I know we went pretty fast. It's only about 20 minutes. If you need to go back and rewatch the video, pause it at any point, you can go use a slideshow to go through your notes for lesson 1. This is also, remember, uploaded to Canvas, so you can replay it as many times as you need.